Okay, thank you. Can I share my slides? Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes,
Yes.
I can see your screen.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Nombulelo Kitsepile Ngulube. I'm a PhD student at Kyoto University. For my research talk today, I'm going to talk about citizen engagement in post-disaster recovery and reconstruction, which will be the lessons from Kamaishi, Unosumai, 11 years after the Great East Japan earthquake. And it is important to note that this is a community perspective. So I broke down the talk into 8 subtopics. I'll first give the introduction, and then highlight on the background of the study, and then I give the objectives, introduce the case study, and then discuss more on the methodology and share the results and discussion, and then give a conclusion, and then highlight future works based on this main topic. So basically, as we all know, that over the past decades, the occurrence and magnitude of disasters has drastically intensified, leaving a huge socio-economic impact, especially for the affected countries. So basically, the reason why I'm saying a socio-economic impact is because disasters don't only cause economic losses, but they also lead to deaths of people, and they affect millions as well. So post-disaster recovery mostly entails reconstruction and rehabilitation. And this are mostly meant to minimize vulnerabilities and try to increase future opportunities for affected communities. And as we all know, that post-disaster planning tries to offer a clear framework and direction on how communities and economies will be recovered after a disaster impact. So post-disaster reconstruction, it's more of a complex undertaking because it involves diverse and multifaceted stakeholders, which range from government level right up until the grassroots level, which are the community members. And as we all know, community participation or community engagement, especially in post-disaster recovery, planning and decision-making, is somehow a key principle in trying to develop resilient communities. And numerous academics and scholars have called for frameworks which center on a community-centered type of recovery, where local communities are given the power and platforms to exercise decision-making authority. But even though numerous work has been done on the need for a community-centered type of recovery, effectively engaging citizens still poses some unique opportunities and challenges, especially in effectively implementing it on the ground. So in 2011, Japan faced its first triple disaster. It faced its first triple disaster in its history, which affected Tohoku region, which is the prefectures of Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima. So more than 27,000 people lost their lives, and this disaster had an economic impact of over $235 billion US. And this was the first multi-location disaster to affect over 200 municipalities in the 3 prefectures. And hence there was a need to try and provide an inclusive and participatory approach from national to local planning in the municipalities of the 3 prefectures. And hence, so as to try and recover from this disaster, the government called for a citizen-centered recovery and reconstruction process. And local governments were encouraged to try and incorporate citizen input in the formulation of the recovery plans. So community participation, especially after the Great East Japan earthquake, was highly encouraged, especially by the national government reconstruction blueprint, where local governments were supposed to include citizen voices, knowledge, and citizen input in the formulation of the recovery plans. But there was no uniform kind of recovery because each municipality followed its own approach towards a reconstruction-based level, especially with the regard of the damage extent which they had experienced, and hence residents were incorporated differently. So communities were incorporated in various ways, especially when we use Sherry Einstein's ladder of citizen participation. Residents were included like from the lower levels of manipulation, which is non-participation, right up to the higher levels of participation, which is citizen control. So different municipalities experience the different levels of participation, especially in reconstruction planning and decision making. So the aims of our research was basically to try and analyze the residents' perspective on the opportunities and challenges they were posed with in the recovery planning in reconstruction, especially of Kamaishi in Unosumai. And then also try to examine how the communities have been able to strengthen their participation in disaster risk reduction initiatives years after the disaster. So as a way to introduce the case study area, which was Kamaishi Unosumai, this was the most affected village in Iwate Prefecture. And Unosumai is a small coastal fishing village in the northern part of Kamaishi city in Iwate Prefecture. And the municipality called for residents to participate in post-disaster reconstruction process. And the reconstruction programs included individual and group relocations of the affected communities. It is important to note that these reconstruction programs were optional. So members of the community were allowed to choose whichever reconstruction project was convenient for them. And the rehabilitation in Kamaishi offered two types of housing reconstruction, which was in situ in the original location and in the relocation sites. And the reconstruction in the relocated sites, it was supposed to be owner-driven, and some did follow a municipality-driven approach. And also to try and encourage residents to effectively participate in the post-disaster reconstruction, the local municipality called for community-driven disaster risk reduction projects through the Citizens Charter in the Tsunami Memorial Center. So for data collection, the study followed more of a qualitative research design, and we used three research tools, which was the use of interviews, observations, and the use of a questionnaire to try and validate data. So most of our information, we got it through the use of interviews. So interviews were very critical for especially enacting the residents' perspective of their participation in the post-disaster reconstruction planning, because here we wanted to get in-depth information around the topic. And also we made use of observations where we were observing respondents' behavior when asked questions. And then, as I have already stated it out earlier, we made use of a questionnaire which was sent on a later date to try and validate the data which we acquired earlier. So for our data analysis, the interviews were prepared and transcribed into the data on Word document. And then afterwards, we went through the data numerous times to try and find sense and meaning of it. And then afterwards, the data was coded. And after it was coded, the codes were grouped into themes based on their relationship and the objectives of the study. So for the results and discussion part, so basically for the opportunities, we tamed at benefits of their participation. So the first benefit, which was highlighted by the respondents, was that there was power to influence decision. And as we still recall from Sherry Einstein's ladder of participation, it was the highest level of participation was acquired in this case study area because residents could share their opinions and views during the recovery planning process. And here the local municipality tried to invite local residents to participate in the planning process, either through neighborhood associations, in community workshops or surveys. The residents also indicated that they could decide on the type of reconstruction they wanted, such as the location of private housing, and also they could decide on the location of public infrastructure, such as schools and community centers. So one of the respondents, we captured his response, where he indicated that the process was democratic as they could choose relocation sites of their residential houses, and those who chose to rebuild in the same location had to adhere to elevation levels. So the other benefit which was captured was livelihood restoration. As we all know that after disasters or livelihood restoration is essential, especially after disasters, because communities need to recover to their pre-disaster stage so that their survival is not disrupted. So numerous residents indicated that through their participation in post-disaster recovery planning and reconstruction, they were able to restore their livelihoods. Some respondents were captured saying, as fishermen, we were given a chance to create an association to decide on our jobs and how we are going to revive the industry. And also it showed like collaboration between the local government and the residents with regard to reviving their livelihoods, because another respondent indicated that the government listened to our suggestions in how we wanted to revive the fishing industry in Kamaishi. So this data somehow showed high consultation and opinion sharing between the fishermen and the local government. And then another benefit which was stipulated by the respondents was capacity building and collaborative planning. Basically, residents indicated that they were capacitated to take part in the recovery planning process. And there was also collaborative planning as they encountered or underwent the planning process together with local stakeholders and government officials. And also through the Machizukuri system, where local residents play an active role in the construction of their surroundings, the residents could actively participate in town planning activities, especially in collaboration with the government and the local municipality stakeholders. It is important to note that the use of the Machizukuri process was very crucial in this aspect, because to some extent, it developed a sense of project ownership, since the local residents were they felt part of the process. And also, the residents indicated that there was collaborative planning, especially in the formulation of the Kamaishi Citizens Charter, which was, for some, they viewed it as a charter for the people, by the people. And then moving on to the challenges which they experienced. The first or the major challenge which most residents indicated was conflicting views of residents. They indicated that many views were put across during the recovery planning process, and this dragged the whole process because it was difficult to agree on the same thing on the shortest time. So the respondents indicated that many people who attended the recovery planning process had different ideas, and it was difficult for them to agree on the same thing, and it somehow took too long of a time to rebuild. And as you can see, like from the diagram underneath, they specified that there was more of like planning, and then a lot of time was spent on consensus building, trying to agree on the on the set program objectives, and then afterwards there was supposed to be execution of the plan. So to them, numerous people or many people taking part, it kind of like reduced the speed of their recovery, which to some extent affected the effectiveness of community participation. And then the other challenge which was indicated was disaster grief. The reason why I put disaster trauma in quotations was because we had to find a word which was culturally acceptable within the Japanese context, and the best suitable one was disaster grief. So first, this was a massive disaster of its magnitude to affect the region, and hence it had a huge socio-economic impact on the residents, with some losing entire families and properties. So the respondents indicated that this affected the participation of many people because they were still grieving for their loss. And some residents indicated that recovery planning came too soon after the disaster. And some people did not take part in the recovery planning as the tsunami was traumatic. And a lot of people are still grieving for the loss of their friends and family. And also another respondent indicated that the disaster affected a lot of people. And when it was time to build back, many people were depressed and they were not interested in taking part in anything. That's showing that disaster grief does play incredible barrier towards attaining successful community participation. And as we can see from the bar graph, we can see that disaster grief, a lot of respondents indicated that disaster grief was the major reason for insufficient involvement of residents, especially after the disaster. So the other challenge which was indicated was aging population and population decline. As we all know, Japan is facing a dramatic population drop, and especially rural communities are the most affected because they are now seeing massive outflow of residents. So population decline affected the ability to achieve a truly participatory approach, especially in post-disaster recovery and reconstruction, because the aging of the population in the study area has had a long-standing problem with the residents' participation, because one of the residents indicated that, as you can see, that Unosumai town is different from Kamaishi city. There are a few people who live in the area, and most of them are elderly people, and that affects residents to participate in planning or any other activity. That's showing that to some extent, aging population and population decline affects the effectiveness of community participation. So the other objective of our study was to try to see how residents have been able to strengthen their participation in disaster risk reduction initiatives since the disaster. And one major way of strengthening community participation, which was indicated by the respondents, was capacity building. They indicated that now they're making use of combined evacuation drills because before the disaster, mostly elderly people, they did not participate in evacuation drills. It was only being done in schools. But now every year in March, they now do evacuation drills because they realized that the community who stayed close to the school managed to reduce the disaster casualties because they always observed students doing the evacuation drills. And hence now, as a way to encourage combined evacuation drills, the local municipality has enacted evacuation drill events, which is promoted by the local municipality. And these events are the Jina Asobi and the Itaden competition. So basically, these are to try to keep the local residents aware of the possible evacuation routes which they are supposed to take during a case of a disaster. And then another way of strengthening community participation through capacity building is volunteering in disaster education. So in Kamaishi, through the residents-led citizens charter in the Tsunami Memorial Museum, which was adopted, or which was proposed by the residents. Here they aim to share lessons from the tsunami lessons, and they try to strengthen participation of residents through volunteering at the Tsunami Memorial Museum. Because when we interviewed one of the volunteers, she indicated that he and many other members do volunteer work at the Tsunami Memorial Museum to try and pass on lessons learned from the tsunami experience, so that what happened in 2011 never happens again. And also in Kamaishi, they are doing numerous community events, such as the Nebama Hamamasu event, which took part in April, so as to try and encourage participation, especially of older residents, because the community's demographics, it's mostly elderly populations taking part. So here there is more of like collaboration between local residents in the local municipality, because as we can see from this picture, community participation is encouraged through the attendance of the mayor in such kind of community events. And then in these events, they share disaster experiences and reflections on lessons of their disaster experience as a community. And hence, through the taking part in different participation events, such as the Hanamasu event, the community of Kamaishi has come up with their own slogan to try and express it to the world in order for other people to adopt lessons from them, which is the miracle of Kamaishi. So basically, it is critical for communities, for us to have a community's perspective with regard to their participation in post-disaster recovery and reconstruction, especially based on their own experiences. And to try and capture this, a qualitative study was done. And the study found out that the residents were able to identify the benefits and the challenges they encountered during their participation in the reconstruction process. And there is need for more research to be done in challenges which affect participation, such as disaster grief and aging population, because we need to see how deeply these factors negatively affect community participation in post-disaster recovery. And there has been a few research done in this area. So for future works, we aim to compare Kamaishi city with other cities in Iwate Prefecture to investigate the significant differences in citizen participation and to see what Unosumai did to make it as a success story, and also try to investigate on the processes and outcomes of effective participation based on the community's perspective. Thank you for listening, and I would greatly appreciate any comments and suggestions and questions you might have.